Okay, Stacy, I pressed record, so we're good to go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on getting to know the Tidal repository. Let's just jump into our agenda items for today. So we are going to start with a review of the key concepts around the Tidal repository. So we're going to look at the architecture, how it fits into the workload automation lifecycle, etc. Then Alistair Davidson will take us through a product demonstration. Then we'll discuss using repository versus transporter, which I imagine many of you are using today. We'll go over future enhancements, the planned roadmap for the solution. I have a few slides at the end on news and highlights, and then we'll use any of our remaining time for Q&A. So speaking of Q&A, a few housekeeping notes before we jump in. All participants are in listen-only mode, so we will be recording the session. It will be posted on our customer portal early next week. If you do have questions, please submit them using the WebEx Q&A panel on the right side of your screen, and we'll answer as many as possible at the end, and those that we don't get to, we will answer and we will post alongside the recording on the portal. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tom O'Rourke. We've got a full session here today, so let's jump right in with the key concepts behind Tidal repository. Tom?
All right, thanks, Rick, and hello, everyone. So the feature of this today is going to be Alistair's demonstration of many of the capabilities of the repository. But before we get into that, I want to just start by making sure that we're clear and that you're clear on where the repository fits and why the repository exists. And I think to start there, we need to talk about this in the context of the transporter. The transporter was developed many years ago, and its key function was to help you be able to move information between Tidal instances. The challenges that we face today is that it was really designed in the time of a client server model, and that's that's a model that is less and less of a fit for the way that people work today. That given the increased need to be able to have controls and demonstrate controls for changes that are happening in your environment, particularly production, but often across all of your environments as you're promoting application changes and schedule changes from development to QA to UNT and production. Client server model really doesn't work well anymore. The desire is to make sure that all the actual changes are being managed server side. And so the repository is our solution for that. It's intended to provide a centralized change management solution. And as we've shared with many of you through webinars and user groups and other discussions, we've modeled the repository on source code repositories like Git and SVN and others, which are also server-side models, that is intentional on our parts. It's intentional in the sense that we recognize that within your organizations, many of you have the need to be able to synchronize the changes that are happening in terms of the application, the development work that is taking place, and the schedule and calendar changes that are taking place on the Tidal side. And so the repository is the fit to that. Key concepts in all of this, although not all of the words are the same, at its root, the repository fulfills the same functions of being able to move data out of a Tidal instance, store it, and move it into another Tidal instance. To do that, it has to make connections to those Tidal instances. There is a pipeline in place, which is the actual mechanism for moving data. And like the transporter, there is a mapping capability in there because there are often changes that you need to make to jobs and job names or to the job targets that you can address with a intelligent mapping solution. The repository is a multi-user solution, and so to deliver that, the repository provides workspaces. These workspaces take those core elements and allow you to assign them to a user or a group of users so that they have a shared set of the pipeline, the connections to the different title instances. They're using a common set of mappings, and that they share a data store inside of the repository that is focused on their particular tasks. Through access control, the title administrator can limit a workspace to be able to work with a portion of the schedule that, it's another layer in the ability to be able to provide access control and limit what a group of users have access to, which again, is keeping in mind that from a control perspective today, title sits in the center of that, and title administrators are responsible for making sure that a user or a group of users has the limited set of access that they need in order to be able to go and do their work. So the next piece in all of this is that the title repository sits outside of the title instance, that it is a separate operations and change management focused element that connects to multiple title instances. So we use the term environments to talk about that collection of instances. In this case, in the diagram, development to QA and a production instance. The repository can connect to all of those and be the mechanism by which you promote changes from development to QA and QA to production. Also to allow you to be able to send changes, perhaps an update to the financial calendars to be used in 2021 out to all of the instances simultaneously. So, it's part of the overall set of title products, but it sits outside of the individual instances, and, it is, neutral to whether you have two title instances, a QA in production, or whether you have, 5, you have engineering, development, QA, UAT in production. The repository doesn't care. It's simply the mechanism that you can use in order to be able to promote things forward. So another view of it architecturally, the repository integrates with the title instances through the client manager. Like the transporter, it uses the client manager APIs to be able to pull data out in order to store within the repository, and then be able to push data, schedules, calendars, other objects, back into another title instance through the client manager. I should also note here that the primary vehicle for interacting with the repository is through a web UI, but the repository also has a command line that you can use in order to be able to integrate the repository actions into your scripts, particularly useful for integrating into your build scripts, and it has a full API. As with the title automation instance itself, there is a REST API that is available. That's the API that we use in order to be able to perform all the UI functions. And therefore, anything that's in the UI, you should be able to do through the API. In fact, as with Tidal automation, there's a superset of capability that's available through the API, features that you can't get to directly through the UI. All right, so highlighting the repository and its fit. The repository is there to be able to go and promote things through the environment. Beginning with making sure that you have the proper, schedule, jobs, calendars, other elements in the development instance for the development team to be able to work on. When their work is complete, you can pull that information out into the repository and then push it into a QA instance. When QA is complete, you can follow that cycle again and promote it on up into the production instance. So the repository sits outside and sits between the different instances in your environment and is the change management tool to use as you're going through the development lifecycle and promoting from development to QA. Since of course the application development is always correct, that QA is immediately able to bless it. There are no issues found, and then it moves on up into production. And so, that takes us forward into the workload automation lifecycle that, we move from that, flat system level view to recognize that this is really a cycle that is taking place, that from, the repository and the repository managing all of the schedule definition objects inside of Tidal. We set up a development instance. We can do the mappings in order to be able to move that to QA. When the QA work is complete, we can do mappings again, make it available in this example to UAT instance as well. And when the users have accepted the application changes, it gets promoted out into production. But of course, we're all working in, iterative, continuous change models. And so, soon enough, the set of changes that went into production are followed up by another cycle of development. You're even able, using the repository, taking advantage of its multi-user capability and versioning to be able to have multiple applications going through this life cycle at their own pace at one time. And so, to kind of close out in this section and to, take this away to the demo, beyond the functional use of the repository as your tool for change management, we have designed the repository from the ground up to also be your tool for control and to satisfy audit requirements, that you're able to demonstrate those controls, that you're able to report out on any anomalies that come up in the execution of your change processes. This is taking the viewpoint that what these changes reflect is the IT supply chain today, that common audit requirements, common customer requirements, if you're delivering solutions to someone outside of your organization, is that you are able to demonstrate that you have control of the supply chain, the source code, the changes that are made in development, the tests that are performed in QA, the acceptance that takes place by the users, and then ultimately the promotion of that to production or the delivery of that to another customer. So to satisfy these requirements, what we've looked at is to make sure that you can use the repository as your single source of truth, that you're able to use it to be able to prevent or detect any unauthorized changes, and that you have the ability to limit user access, to provide them with minimal privileges while making sure that every change that is taking place in the repository is logged so that you can present a record of all activity to audit, should that be sufficient. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alistair to go and walk through these features.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, let me just get my slide here. Thank you very much for that. And greetings for a very wet and windy England. So thank you, Tom, for that explanation. We've had a look at the key differences between Transporter and some of the similarities. We've looked at the architecture and some of those life cycle concepts that we're trying to deal with in the Tidal repository. So what I'll do now is take you a little bit beneath the covers so we can see the components and illustrate how those components are used to satisfy some of the key use cases that we might have in this whole life cycle concept. So as we get in here, the first thing to note is that there's quite a lot of things that you'll be very familiar with as long-time Tidal users. It's quite Tidal-like in the concept. So when we start by looking at security and the user definitions, we can see that we can, just like Tidal, we can define users and groups. And the users and groups are going to have permissions to define and maintain the objects that are available to them. And then from there, we can define our security policies, and then we can use the security policies to determine how our users, our work groups are able to interact with the product and what they actually have access to in the whole life cycle. Because clearly, one of the key concepts is the ability to allow developers to do their work without them interfering in some of the critical stuff that's happening inside production. So let's take a look inside that. So here's the Tidal repository workspace. For my workspace, I'm going to create a user. That user is defined with access to the different types of repository objects. So whether it's adding connections, repositories, adding other LDAP groups or security policies, other users, that's all done from within this user definition. LDAP groups, just like Tidal, we can use them. So there you can see we've completed this one to allow the LDAP group rather than the individual user to have access to the add workspaces, connections, and so on. Add work groups, Tidal has the work group concept. We do that here. So we've created a work group and we're going to give that work group a security policy. Looking at that security policy, we can see that we've defined it to give it a means of access to certain elements of the things that we've allowed them access to. So we're not allowing them to delete objects. We're not allowing them to revert to different repository versions. One of the handy things they put in there, Tom mentioned the useful connections for developers, such as the command line interface and the REST-based API. Well, we can test that out here. So the Swagger UI allows us to try out some of the controls we might want to use inside our scripts. So for example, repository controller is going to allow us to look and see what repositories we've got listed there, and then we could use the information that's coming back from those REST calls further down in our script to try and access those repositories and to do our moves along the pipelines or whatever other type of action we want to take place inside there. So moving on from that to connections. So connections, again, we've got some of this is quite familiar stuff. So with the connections, we can define the Tidal instances that we're going to use in that workload automation lifecycle environment. So we can define our development instances, pre-production, UAT, and so on. One of the things that is different is that the transporter would necessitate you having users defining all of these different connections. And of course, it would be one-to-one. Connections, we're going to define multiple of them and we're going to use them in our pipelines. And what we can do, because of the security model we've previously seen, it would allow us to say, okay, we'll allow our repository users to have access to the connections. The connections are defined with the correct credentials of the person to log into the target connection. So all we need to do is release that connection to our development users, our production users, and so on. So it's less maintenance, it's less stress on your client manager connections as well. So let's have a look at how they're defined. So connections, so we've got 3 set up there. We'll just do an edit on this one, for example, just to see what we've got there. So you can see it's very simple to define, give it a name, optional description, and within that descriptive field, you could put in anything. Of course, we've got a refresh interval because we can keep refreshing that connection to get anything new that's coming in. And there you can see the client manager URL, dead easy to put that one in. And we can then just define the login and access to this connection. So you can see that the access, it's owned by myself there. We could make that a public connection so everyone can do it, or we can share with the users, the work groups, the LDAPs that we've already set up, just to sort of devolve responsibility for using and managing that connection, if that's what we want to do with it. Moving from there to mapping. So obviously things change between instances. And again, Tidal users will be very familiar with mappings within Transporter and how things can be mapped between those development and non-development environments. So the repository enables you to automatically define and easily save those mappings for the different variations that you have there. And this isn't the kind of mapping that's just held in a flat file on your laptop or whatever. This is actually stored within the repository. So again, it's that single source of truth. The mappings are part of the definitions, and we can allow access to mappings to different users. So again, another window opens there for the mappings, and if we edit that one, you can see that it's got all the different elements that you might want to map in there, the job classes, the jobs, the job groups, and so on. We've got the new tag element, of course, in the latest versions that can also be mapped too. So inside there, we can see that we've already got some agents mapped. And one of the things that we can do is obviously map the different names in pre and post. And to make a mapping, we can actually populate. So we can populate the destination there and select, this will come up in a second, it'll select all of the agent lists that we've got there. We could select them one by one. In this case, we've taken the whole lot. And once we've selected them, we are free to start editing them. So you can see there that the source, it's a Linux broadcast list there. We can just change that to our pre-production and map everything like that. So actually populating the list of mappings is quite easy to do, and then making those changes is similarly a fairly simple process. And of course, down there, we can also share those mappings there with different users, with different work groups, or make them public. So like Tidal, we make as much in common as possible between the different tabs, so it's simple to know where you're going to make those definitions. So that's the mappings covered. Repository. So this is one of the key concepts for the Tidal repository product as a whole, is the repository can hold multiple versions of Tidal objects. So this whole idea of having a single source of truth, having multiple versions held in one place is done with the actual repository. Conceptually, it's very, very simple. It's just a box in which we're going to hold our different versions of the Tidal objects that we've mapped, that we've moved through the pipelines. And these can be promoted or reverted through the whole life cycle. Again, going in there, the repository's definition can be done there. Absolutely simple to set up. There's our our dev, our production repositories. So the repositories we're going to use them fairly soon. So these are, at the moment, they are just individual instances of repositories, individual stores for our objects. We're going to use these in our pipelines in one moment. So again, just give it a name, description, and share that repository with whoever it needs to be shared with. So we could have the developers repository. It belongs to the Tidal devs. We've put that inside there. And again, we could attach a security policy. So even though we're giving them access to that development repository, they can't go and delete it or revert it if we choose for them not to, based on that security policy. So pipelines, again, an absolutely key concept for the Tidal repository, because this takes us away from that one-to-one relationship. We can have a one-to-one relationship between a repository and a connection and another connection. But more importantly, we can do things like set up one-to-many relationships. So that would allow us, for example, as we'll see later in the demo, to use one repository to blast out a definition or a set of Tidal definitions to multiple targets. So it allows that mass updates with minimal effort for those objects that are in common. For example, your business calendar changes for a particular application. Once you're satisfied that that calendar is good and fully defined, we can put that out not one at a time, but to all instances. So again, let's take a look at how we're defining them. This is probably looking quite familiar by now, the same sort of concept to create and to edit there. So there's a number of pipelines that we've defined there for dev connection to dev repository. We can see in there. So this is going to the Tidal client manager, and it's taking the connection from there. And we can see that the source is the development AP apps repository. So the movement is going to be between maybe more. We've got 2 connections there now defined. So we can have multiple target connections to one repository. We can have multiple repositories connected to that source repository. So this is just giving you a flavor of the amount of variation you can have in those one-to-many mappings. So connections to repository, repository to repository, and so on. So this allows you then to, obviously there's the security going in there again, so it's allowing you to build these pipelines for, and because we can have multiple pipelines, it means that we can have one pipeline to maybe blast out definitions to everything, another pipeline that's just one-to-one, which is obviously just for testing things like the development connection to the development objects. So these are the main components of repository, and once we've defined them, you can then give them to your different users or your different groups. So that's done by assigning those different objects that we've created in a repository to the workspace. So the workspace is simply your desktop, effectively. So it allows the developer, the operator, the managers, whoever needs to have access to a repository can be given safe and secure access to only those things that they need, but it will then allow them to do the jobs that they need to do without having to go backwards and forwards between different transporters or different clients to start fiddling about with things. It's all there at their fingertips through that desktop. And that's what it looks like. So here you can see some of the things we've created there. We've got a set of repositories, we've got a set of pipelines there, we've got connections, and we've got mappings. And so, again, this is all determined by security. So clearly wouldn't allow all people to have access to all things. We can just clean up those desktops and just allow the access as necessary. There's one more thing down there, which is tasks. We'll take a look at tasks and what they can do, or what we can do with them a little bit later. Okay, so that's our workspace. So what are the kind of things that we're going to do with things? So there's 2 things to explore within the pipelines, and one is the pull, the other is the push. So the pull is making so the example given here, the developers completing work on their application, and they can pull their completed objects to the development repository. They don't have to log into the client manager to do that pull. They can do their work within the client that's been assigned to them in Tidal, and then they can go into a repository, use their desktop to make that pull to the development repository. So we can see that there through the repository we're going in. And so this is because it's a pull, we can see all of the jobs there that are existing on that target. So I'm filtering that down. You can see that the filters are built in there just to the repo demo ones. And you can see a couple of things here. The left side shows what's already in the repository, and the right column shows the connection. And this ticks between there, we're going to synchronize now to make that pull. The ticks indicate whether or not that object exists in the target. So in other words, this one already has those development objects inside the repository. So the sync's been done. You can see the console appear there, so you've got an idea of progress as we go through that. And then we've got our objects inside there. So once we've done that, they can then be committed. So at this stage, we've simply made the pull. We've made the pull from that development connection. We've brought them into the repository, but at this stage, we haven't yet committed. So that's what we'll do here. So again, you can see the repositories. So we go into the one that we've just used for that pull. Our development one, you can see there's those objects that we filtered through and pulled in there. So we only pulled in jobs for this particular one, and you can see we could have pulled in the calendars, or resources, events, and so on. There's the logs telling you, giving you that audit trail for what's going on inside there. And now, critically, we can commit. So now we have a version of that pull. And we can say whatever description we particularly want to put inside that. And then we can commit. Okay, so now you can see that we've got the version is listed up in the top left there. We've got versions that we can use now. Okay, so we can also have multiple versions that we can store inside there for if we want to do things like make some mass changes inside. So here's an example where the developer might have made a change there. He's changed the command parameter. And also changed the agent inside there. And so we've got that saved. And from there, we've committed a second version. So we've made some changes there inside our development environment. So we don't need to log in now. So we've made the changes in Tidal in the development environment there. We don't now need to log in to make our comparisons of those different versions. We can go inside there. We can look at our latest version. Sorry, if we've done our pull, we've committed the latest version. So here comes version 2, and this is the one we're going to compare with our previous version. So here we go again. We go inside that repository. We go inside there and open up the repository. We take a look and see that we've got those 4 jobs still inside there. And now we're going to do our comparison. So you can see there we can compare connections, or we can compare repositories. So we can compare that repository with what's in the connection, or compare repository to repository. And in this one, you can see on the left, we're comparing the latest version with the original version. So there's the agents change. It's got the MS window agent inside there now. And we can also see that down there, that reflects down the parameters, the fact that we changed the command parameter on our development instance. Okay, so that's whole concept, the single source of truth, allows us just to dive into the repository and check the changes inside there, make the comparisons. It means we don't have to dig into all of our different Tidal instances to find out who changed what, where, and when. Okay, one of the other great things about repository is that it's easy to make mass changes before promotion in that whole workload automation lifecycle. So what we can do is, for example, when you want to run different command parameters between development and pre-production instances. So in the past, this could have got quite ugly. So if someone wants to make mass changes, think, well, what the heck, I can't go and change every single definition I've got there. I'm just going to dive into the database and do a quick and dirty change. Dangerous and quite ugly and quite messy and kind of hard to revert as well. So with this, the whole beauty of having numerous instances or numerous versions of your Tidal repositories is that they're easily reverted. So we can make that mass update. Again, we're not having to dive into different Tidal instances. We're going into the repository to make those changes. We're going to go into the repository. We're going to make a mass change. We're going to promote that. And then we're going to be able to take that back if what we've done is not something that we're happy with. So if we go into there, we're going to go back to our development repository. And you can see there's the latest version that we've got there. And what we're going to, and there's the jobs that we've got inside there. There's the bulk update button. This is opening up a wizard for you to use. So we can select either everything, or we can select just one of the objects inside there. The next step is to edit or delete. So again, mass deletions are possible from the repository. So you can see this will be familiar to Tidal users as well. We've got the command parameters. These are all the things from the job tab. So, you know, from our dir, we're changing that now to an echo of what we're changing inside here, just to illustrate how we can make those mass changes. Okay, so we just need to confirm that. And we can see that that bulk operation is successful. We've made those mass changes now. Okay. So from there, again, we can see the comparison that we've done there. And inside now, we've got the change that's been made. So we can see there the parameters have been changed en masse to the elements that we entered in the previous part of that demo. So mass changes reflected now and compared with inside the repository. Okay. So moving on from that one, here's the push now. So we've done our pull. So these are examples of so we've seen how we can pull, we can bring objects into the repository, and we can then manipulate them. We can make mass changes. We can do comparisons. So all of these things have been done following the pull. What we can do now is use those same pipelines and change that to making a push. So that same pipeline is used for pulling and for pushing objects. So, and the example again, so you've pulled from the dev to the repository, and now you can promote those objects with or without those changes to another repository. Okay, so that's what we'll do in the next section of the demo. Let's have a look at the push. So this time we've selected our pipeline that's taken us to their pre-production environment. See there, when we put push, it changes. It's a lot less to look at because we've only got that set of jobs inside the pipeline, or sorry, inside the repository. We've applied a mapping there as well. So that mapping that we defined in the early stage of the demo can be used to push those elements into the pre-production environment. And again, the ticks allow you to, so the check boxes allow you to select what you're putting in. And we can go then and take a look and see that those changes that we've made have now been applied in our pre-production environment. So the mass changes have now been pushed out to the pre-production environment. Okay, so that's an example of pushing. So that allows you to push the single element to single pipeline to the pre-production environment. What we can also do there is to put a more extensive push, in other words, push to multiple locations. So it's not restricted to that one connection or repository. We could rapidly update objects that are common to all instances, the example being a business calendar change. So it's a prime example where you might want to make a change and apply it instantly to all of your Tidal instances. And this is what we can do by pushing, using a pipeline that pushes to multiple connections. So here we have a before and after. So we can see two Tidal instances with a job group with no jobs inside. So this represents our pre-production and maybe our production environments, or UAT. So from that, we're going to push these jobs that we've got in our development repository to all of these connections. And so again, we've got to select the pipeline You can see that we've got one there for all connections to the development repository. So again, I'm not pulling, I'm pushing, so I switch the button there. And you can see what's changed here. So there's an extra couple of columns which represent the different targets there. So now we've got not one, but 3 Tidal instances. And again, we've got the check boxes to allow us to select or exclude objects from that push. And we also have the tick box to represent what already exists. Again, we press the sync button, and that will do the push to those different targets. And we've got the console. With the console as well, it's possible to double click. We haven't shown that in this demo, but we can double click those things, and we can get the progress of the push as it goes through. Everything's pretty well audited within the console there, so it's not quite as difficult as Transporter to see what's going on there. Okay, so we've got our objects have now been populated in all those Tidal instances. So you can see that the multiple destination push has been successful there. Okay. So finally, we've got the ability to perform tasks. Tasks are an interesting element, and these are very nice things to add onto your desktop. So I haven't looked at these at all yet. What this does is give you the ability to click and run predefined operations. So we've set up quite a few things there, and clearly this demands some knowledge of Tidal Repository. It requires the knowledge of what you're wanting to do, the connections that you've defined for the pipelines you've defined. All of that requires somebody to set up. But just like in Tidal itself, you might want to delegate a lot of those operations and make things simple. Increasingly, people just want to say, I've set this up for you. All you need to do is push the button and it will go. So we as administrators could set up some pull push operations in advance, and then we could make that available for users in their desktop, for users and group, just to run those multiple steps just with a single click, without, as I call it there, going under the covers, without understanding the structure of the pipelines, the connections below it. So again, we'd set that all up with our access control, and this is the way we would set up our tasks. So we've got that button there. There's one that's already been set. What we will do is build a new task down here. So we've got a task object there. We connect that, and so this is the name that we're going to give. We're going to push that master reference calendar to everything. And so inside here, of course, we've got our repository, which is the source. We've got which version we're going to push out. So this is the kind of stuff we set up in our previous mini demos there. So you can see that this is kind of more wizard-like. We've got the ability to add what type of entity we're going to add to this task. In this case, the entity type is calendars. I want to push that master reference calendar to all of these destinations that are in the pipeline as a task. So that's built, that's created. And now this gives you an example of how we kind of populate these workspaces as well. I'm going to, and you can imagine me giving this permission to another user to add this to their desktop. I've added that task alongside all the other stuff that I've allowed them to their desktop. So when I go to my workspace and I scroll down to the tasks, you can see that push is now available there. And you can see that the repository has the latest version of that. The all instances repository doesn't. So of course, this is what I'm doing with this. So by clicking that, you can see that that's pushed that across to our production repository. So what I've done with that particular task is I've kind of put in an extra step. So, you know, it may be that we don't yet want to commit that and push it out to all the connections at this stage. So I've just put that into my repository that I've created for all of the connections. So the task is allowing you to take away the difficulty of defining that stuff from your users. It allows you to go straight in and make those definitions and present that to the end user as a finished thing. that allows them to push it into their production repository or take it all the way to the different connections. Okay, so I think hopefully that's given you a lightning overview of the different components that are involved in repositories. So we've looked at the pipelines, we've looked at the connections, we've looked at the user definitions, some of those things that make the Tidal repository very different, and although having some similarities to the transporter. And hopefully that's given you a flavour of how we can use the connections that we've defined to delegate authorities, to delegate the use of transporting objects to different users and to different work groups, to allow them to move through the whole life cycle, to revert back where necessary with the different versions from their repository. So obviously that's there's a lot to look at there, and we would be very happy to show you any of these elements in more detail on later occasions. With that, I shall hand you back to Tom.
All right, thank you, Al. So let's summarize where we are and how we're going to proceed forward. So, the repository, today fulfills the functions of the transporter, but it goes further in order to be able to allow you to, embed the repository in the synchronization of, the source code and schedule activities so that you can fit inside of your application development lifecycle. In this example here, what you can see here is, as I'm going to build out the elements of this as we, look at the dev instance and we establish connections, a repository, a mapping, pipeline in order to be able to build it in our workspace. Then we have the capability through the pipeline to be able to execute that pipeline from our command line, tying that into Jenkins or the build mechanism of your choice. So we're combining Jenkins and Tidal together. That then allows you to be able to promote out to QA. And what you see then is that we wind up building out equivalent structures within our workspace for the targeted development effort or the targeted development team to be able to work with these structures as they go through their execution of the life cycle, as they iterate through, in a DevOps world of, making changes, pushing them to QA, promoting them to UAT, and then ultimately putting them out into production. So, as Rick Kane, set up for me at the start, we have the transporter today, and many of you are using the transporter. In fact, based on our discussions with you, based on, the downloads that we've seen so far, I'd say that, we're still in the stage right now where more than 90% of you have stuck with the transporter or are using other tools in order to be able to, make things work. And, if your focus today is purely on making, schedule and calendar changes and handling the updates as you install new service packs, new versions of Tidal software, they both work. But the repository doesn't simplify everything by allowing you to manage a single source of truth and to do it from a server. You're not reliant on a single desktop. But the repository does add in other capabilities. Enterprise change management through versioning, control of connections so that you can decrease the number of people who need to have access to your title instances, to be able to do delegation via workspaces. You know, as an administrator workbench, being able to do bulk updates. From a developer process perspective, you know, we have designed the repository model in the command line interface to be able to, you know, synchronize with your own build tools. And then lastly, providing a server-based solution to, you know, to improve that audit chain of custody. So as we're working right now on the next release, the big elements for us are going to be to expand out the capabilities of the connections in order to be able to, you know, handle updates from a live perspective. I was, you know, monitoring the Q&A, so we have been working to expand the set of definition objects that the repository, you know, handles. And our target this fall is that the repository will handle all of the definition objects, including the new objects that we will be adding in the fall release. And then finally, probably the most requested feature we've heard, you know, on the repository in the last year, export and import functions for this, the ability to be able to export out externally from the repository to meet your change management policies or your audit requirements, to have an external copy of the title schedule outside of the title tools. As we look at the future, we are you know, looking at the releases in 2021. We have some ideas here about advanced mapping, about being able to handle repository inheritance, to you know, streamline some of the things that go on when you're delegating change out, and then supporting non-title connections. So being able to establish a connection to another tool that has a scheduling mechanism inside it, and being able to bring those schedule objects into the repository. Beyond that, as we said, you know, this fall we're going to handle all the definition objects. We're looking at how we can use the repository to handle moving the configuration objects and applying the same set of mechanisms around connections, around mapping, pipelines, and tasks, and then also bringing in analytics around change management and compliance. So we, you know, with the release of Title Repository 1.1, we did a refresh on the product guide, the command line guide, and the REST API guide based on the feedback and the new features that we received. What we've also got in the RWorks is a repository training module, which will be available on the portal for you to be able to download. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rick Kane to tell you a little bit about what else is going on besides the title repository. So Rick?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, let me just rip through a few pieces of news here before we try to jump into a few minutes of Q&A. So a couple quick things. One, we are entering the last few weeks of our new adapter promotion. So one of our last webinars, we talked about and demoed some of our newer adapters, ServiceNow, Informatica Cloud, SAP PI, and we have a promotion going on where you can get a production license of one of those adapters, 12 months of support, and a day of professional services for install, configuration, and training for a low price. So a number of you have taken advantage of this promotion, but if you have not and you're still interested, you've got till the end of September. Please reach out to your account rep or go to sales@titlesoftware.com, and we can get you a formal quote and things along those lines. Next one, Tom. So one quick thing that there seems to be a lot of confusion about, and support wanted me to touch on very quickly here. If you're moving from 6.5x, 6.5.2, 6.5.3, 6.5.4 to 6.5.5, important to know that this move is a patch, right? It's not an upgrade. They're service packs, right? They include hot fixes, bug fixes, updates, enhancements. They're all regression tested, et cetera, and delivered in a single installable package, right? But we want to stress that it's not an upgrade, right? It's not as time consuming and everything. You need to view it as a patch versus that. So we've had a lot of customers come to us saying, they're concerned about making the move from 654 to 655, and it's really not as big a deal, I think, as a lot of people think that it is. So just wanted to make a quick point of that. Speaking of upgrades, we do have a new piece of literature out on our website, or on the portal, which I think is really fantastic, right? It's a article on the countless reasons to upgrade. So it's a great document. It includes really all the different enhancements that have been put in the product since version 6.3. Right, so if you're looking to justify, you're looking to see if an upgrade would be a benefit to you, this document literally details all the enhancements that we put into the product, in the last 2.5 years, right? In addition, there's also a section that lists out best practices to keep in mind when upgrading. So thank you to our partner Bluehouse who helped us write that portion of it as well. But really a great document. I would highly recommend that you go out to the portal and take a look at that if you are not already on the current version of the product. Next one, Tom. So we are continuing to host virtual regional user groups. So we had a couple last month. We have a few more coming up in early October. We're going to have a financial services vertical industry session on October 1st, being hosted by Ed McGetrick and Eric Ragone. And then Diana Smith is hosting a Minnesota customer user group on October 6th. So if you're interested in any of these events, you've not received an invite, please reach out to your rep or sales@tidalsoftware.com. If you haven't had one in your area and you're interested in that as well, you can reach out to sales@Tidal Software, and we'll work on getting one scheduled in your area soon as well. And then lastly, our next webinar is scheduled for September 24th. The topic will be innovative scheduling constructs, so getting more done more efficiently within your schedule development. So, we're going to be talking about things like job factories, which has been a topic that a lot of customers are beginning to utilize and a lot of people are asking more and more about. We're going to talk about compound conditionals, local group and job variables, and much more, really about helping you all get more out of the product that you are currently using. So that was all I had for the news. So I think we've got a few minutes for Q&A, and so I'm just going to jump right in, Tom and Alistair, anyone that wants to answer. But those first questions, a couple of questions about versioning. What versions are supported by repository, and can it handle multiple Tidal versions, say dev and prod, or on different versions, things like that? Yeah,
so it's a good question. The answer is that we're testing the repository and the transporter against 6.2, from everything from 6.2.1 up to 6.5.5. So both the repository and the transporter will support cross-version transitions. But you do need to understand that if you go backwards, say from 6.5.5 to 6.3.5, for example, that there are new elements in the 6.5 schema, like tags, that there's no place for in 6.3. So while we do support, going in both directions, there's no magic there. We can't change the schema in an older version to make room for schedule objects that are only in a newer release.
Perfect. There's some questions about costs and licensing. There is currently no additional cost for existing customers for this product. So all of you that are here, I'm imagining on this call, I'm not sure if that will always continue. And for customers that are new to Tidal, there may be costs, but for all of you that are existing customers, there is no cost currently for it. Question about managing versioning. Can you revert back to previous versions once you've made changes?
Yes, you can. So, the repository will have a list of all the versions that you've used or committed, at least. So any of those committed versions can be reverted to using the repository interface and using the pipelines.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. There's a question about search and replace. Can you go in and change just a portion of a command versus having to change the entire command?
I think, as far as I'm aware right now, you'd have to change that the entire command. I'm not aware of any search and replace, but it's maybe something that's in the future, Tom. I don't know if that's
I saw that question come in, and the no, it's working at the level of the command right now, although we could certainly look at shrinking it down. But it led me to also think about whether, whether as part of bulk update, we could do the equivalent of bulk search and replace, and we'll take that under consideration. It's not planned for the fall release, but we'll take all of the inputs that we got in via Q&A and look at them, whether, because we're very interested in the ideas of the community. We're very interested in the experiences of the community. We're confident you'll find ways to use the repository that we didn't think of, and we'll come up with ideas that we will want to, consider and figure out how to deliver through the repository.
Excellent. I think you answered the question on objects other than jobs and groups. A couple about training materials, and you mentioned there is going to be some. Do you have a time frame when that's going to be available?
The training deck itself is pretty close to done. We still have editing and production work to do on it, so I don't expect it in the next couple of days. But I do expect that we will have it out in a matter of weeks, not months.
Okay. Excellent. Question about sizing. You've got thousands of jobs, objects. How's performance with it?
It is equivalent to what we have with the transporter right now. We've identified some opportunities to go and make it faster, but that's going to be driven by changes to the client manager, not just to the repository. And to do that, when we make those changes will be in recent versions of 6.5. We will not be going back to do anything for 6.2 and 6.3, since they're going end of maintenance and then ultimately end of life.
Okay. And question about transporter, is it being retired?
I want to like getting everybody onto 6.5. I want to do it mostly by carrots on all of this. We believe that the repository is the best tool for people who have workflows or other reasons that they don't think they can move off of the transporter. We want to talk to them, and we want to make sure that we can go and move them over. There are things we're just not going to be able to deliver through the transporter. We can't deliver the same level of audit control. For example, if you want to do versioning with the transporter, you're on your own. And so, our intent is, let's get people trying the repository out and tell us what else you need to move over.
Excellent. All right. Well, we're definitely not going to get, there's a bunch of questions. We're definitely not going to get to them all. So we will post them on the portal. There are some questions about, is there going to be a recording available? As I mentioned at the start, yes, there will be. It will be posted early next week on our portal. So if you go to the portal under Support Center, there's a section for webinars. You can find all of our webinars posted there. So we just got to make sure it's, get the recording, clean it up, et cetera, put it on there. So you will see that early next week. And we will also post the answers to the questions that we did not get to. I apologize if you asked one and we did not get to it, but we will get to it and get it answered next week. So thank you all very much for attending. Hopefully you found this valuable. And we look forward to seeing you at the webinar next month. Thank you very much.